It's 1920, and you're on a westbound train from Chicago. As the evening turns to night, you head to your room in a fancy Pullman car. It's a new experience for you, as a well-dressed African-American finishes turning down your bed for you to get a good night's sleep. With a polite, "Thank you, George." His name isn't George, by the way, but that's what everyone else calls him. You give him a modest tip and settle in for the night. You don't realize it as your mind drifts to the rocking of the rails, but you are helping to build a new middle class of Americans. Hello, and welcome back to History in Focus, your one-stop shop for the stuff they didn't teach you in school. Today, we'll be focusing on the Pullman Porter and their impact on African American history. Just remember to give Freedom a ring and hit that subscribe button. But before we get started, I just want to make a quick mention that my primary source for this information is the fantastic book Rising from the Rails, Pullman Porters and the Making of the Black Middle Class by Larry Tye. If you want to learn more about the Porters, I highly recommend it, and will include a link to the book on Amazon in the description below. So first and foremost, let's establish what a Pullman Porter is. A porter is someone who will help passengers on a train ride. Think of them like a flight attendant. The most prominent user of porters was the Pullman Palace Car Company. Founded in 1867, the Pullman Company was the leading manufacturer of sleeper cars for the railways. Created by George Pullman, the Pullman sleeper car was a design that was more comfortable and luxurious than anything else on the rails. They had seats that turned into beds, private rooms, and staffed kitchens. Before long, every railroad was requesting cars from the Pullman Company. But the Pullman Company didn't just build the cars, they also hired the staff who would work on them. Pullman porters were African Americans who worked for the Pullman Company, attending to the needs of the passengers. This included everything from turning down beds, shining shoes, to fetching food. According to a 1926 report, the average wage of a porter was $78.11 a month, for a total of $973.32 a year, or $15,541 today after adjusting for inflation. When you include that most porters made an average of $697 on tips, that amounted to $27,111.60 in today's money. However, Pullman porters were also required to pay for their own food and uniforms. Now, the reason why George Pullman hired only African Americans was not necessarily for altruistic reasons. After the Civil War, there was a massive population of recently freed slaves who were looking for work. Recognizing that these former slaves already had the right demeanor for servitude and could be paid low wages, George Pullman quickly set about offering men jobs to work on his cars. The hours may have been long, but it was better than working on the hot plantations, and the ability to travel across the country was a luxury most Americans, especially African Americans, could not afford in the early years after the Civil War. By the 1900s, the Pullman Company was the single largest employer of African Americans anywhere in the country. In African American communities, being a Pullman porter was considered not only a respectable job, but a prestigious one, and often generations of African Americans worked as porters for the company. This helped to create a new middle class for the African American community, and one that would go on to be influential in the coming years. It was the prospect of better jobs in the northern states that was passed on by the porters that helped to fuel the Great Migration north. However, because this is the United States, being a porter was not considered to be a job worthy of respect to most white Americans. Most Pullman porters were simply called George, because they were seen as being George's boy, similar to how a slave was viewed. In fact, of the 12,000 porters who worked for the Pullman Company, only 362 of them were actually named George. This would sort of change in the 1910s, as a group calling itself the Society for the Prevention of Calling Sleeper Car Porters George, which included prominent members such as Admiral George Dewey, Babe Ruth, and King George V, was founded. Despite being founded as a joke, the group lobbied the Pullman Company to eventually install racks showing cards with the actual name of the porter on duty. However, this was far from the worst offense faced by porters. They were often subjected to racism, both from passengers and the Pullman Company itself, sexual harassment, and all the while forced to carry a smile. As Tye describes it, his was the best job in the community and the worst on the train. While the Pullman Company was the largest employer of African Americans in the country, they often looked for a specific type, namely ones with darker skin complexions. The most agreed reason for this was so that the porter would not be confused with a passenger and, in essence, to be invisible to the passengers. Some passengers would also regularly subject the porters to degrading. Besides the usual use of the N-word, passengers would ask porters to bark like a dog, let children ride them like horses, or rub their head to get good luck. There were also the regular issues that would come with intoxicated passengers such as vomit and trying to get porters to sleep with them. In one particularly interesting case, Sumner Welles, the Undersecretary of State during the FDR administration and the handpicked successor to then Secretary of State Cordell Hull, propositioned porters to sleep with him. When this became public knowledge, Welles was forced to resign in disgrace. It was these conditions, long hours, and low pay that finally convinced porters to begin organizing. Barred from joining other white-dominated railroad unions, in 1925 the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, or BSCP, was created. This was the first all-African-American union. Led by Philip A. Randolph, the union would scratch, claw, and lobby for improving worker conditions for 12 years, before becoming not only the first African-American union to receive a charter from the American Federation of Labor, but also the first to sign a contract with a major corporation. Perhaps the least celebrated legacy of the Pullman Porters is their work in the civil rights movement, as several served as early leaders. It was E.D. Nixon, a Pullman Porter from Montgomery, Alabama, who organized the Montgomery bus boycott, first by choosing Rosa Parks to violate the law that required African Americans to give up seats to whites, then by choosing Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. to lead the following bus boycott. Malcolm X, in his early youth, worked for the Pullman Company, and his experiences there helped to shape his worldviews on civil rights for African Americans. The BSCP would often lend their meeting halls for civil rights groups to meet at. They would also donate money to civil rights causes, helping to fund not only the Montgomery bus boycott, but also the March on Washington, which A. Philip Randolph organized.
Things that white citizens possess, all of their rights. They want no reservation. They want complete equality, social, economic, and political. And no force under the sun can stem and block and stop this civil rights revolution which is now underway.
As the railroads declined in the 60s, so too did the Pullman Company and the Pullman Porters. In 1968, the Pullman Company ceased operations and was absorbed by Bombardier Transportation. The BSCP would later merge with another union in the 70s. While the Porters themselves may no longer be around, their legacy is all-encompassing, not just as leaders for workers' rights, nor as the vanguard for the civil rights movement, but for the legacy themselves, their children, and their children's children, established as teachers, doctors, pastors, political leaders, and judges. If you enjoyed this week's content, please subscribe for future videos. Let us know what you thought in the comments below and what you would like us to cover next.
I think history was written today which will have its effect on coming generations with respect to our democracy, with respect to our ideals,